Namah Shivaya. Vinny got a new mala, so we had to sing Om Namah Shivaya 108 times. We might have gone over.
It's got it.
So, is everybody ready for Memorial Day? Me and Eric were talking about how people in our industry have PTSD. And right around this time of the year, we start getting anxious, and it's like some scar that's built inside of us. You know, the traffic starts to build, and we got to get a lot of stuff done, and we got to get the houses ready, and you know, and everybody wants a lot of stuff. People don't show up, and all this stuff happens. And what it boils down to is we are completely powerless over the outcome of everything that's going to happen. So we got the power to make the phone call, and we got the power to schedule, and we got the power to get up in the morning and do our best, but we do not have the power over anyone else doing anything they do. And that powerlessness thing is, did it spill?
It's on your phone, yeah.
I don't think it's enough to worry about. It's anyway,
On your phone is sitting there.
powerless over the spill.
I tried.
I think Lauren's gonna get something. So, a lot of stuff happens when the Earth shifts its axis, starts to come around the other way, and a lot of times we, as human beings, try to forget that at the core of our being, of our spirit nature, that we are very much, I'm not going to say enslaved to how nature happens, but we are driven by nature. So, you know, the birds start to come back, and a lot of things start to happen, and a lot of times us as human beings think that we're not part of it. You know what I mean? Like, we got so much stuff to do that we don't, you know, like we gotta clean the mess up from the stuff in the trees, and we have to, you know, maybe we have to mow the lawn, and we think a little bit about these things because we're humans and we have to do things, but sometimes we forget that our innate nature is movement in the spring. We forget. So, and when we forget, fear arises, doership starts to happen. So, I think we need to just be aware as everything's starting to happen, and it's starting to pick up, the speed starts to pick up, and everybody starts to go a little faster around us. We need to slow down. Like today, my mantra was slow down. Slow down. Just slow down. Nothing's in a rush in nature. Trees are taking their time. Right now, they're just waiting for that first sunny day. Every leaf is going to pop. They're just taking their time. So we need to take our time. So we need to be human beings instead of human doings. You know what I'm saying, Lauren? Because we think we got to get a lot done in this lifetime. Eric's like, I'm going to go down to Mexico and I'm going to see a band. And I'm like, man. Yeah, let's all go to Mexico and watch Boots. But there's also a side of me that's like, oh, God. Now I'm taking next week off and I don't know where I'm going. Who knows? Because I can fly anywhere I want. But I'm taking the week. And I'm like, where am I going to go? And sometimes the thought of where you're going to go can cause anxiety. So I need to get a map like they used to do in the old days, throw a dart at it. You know what I mean? Wherever the dart lands, I'm going to go. I hope it doesn't hit the North Pole. It's still cold up there. But I go if I got to go. Om Namah Shivaya, all day today, Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya. I couldn't wait to get here tonight to chant Om Namah Shivaya. And I was singing it all day. I know it's the one we're gonna do. The one we end with is the one we're gonna start with. Anyway, I know you all know what I'm talking about, because we're all in the industry. Oh, and just so you know, if you've driven down Palmquag, you've seen the sign. Has everybody seen the sign on Palmquag? The Yoga House coming June 1st to the VFW. Yay! In red and white letters. I saw it and I was like, wow. And the next thing that came up was $5 burgers on Wednesday. So if you want to get a nice cheeseburger on Wednesdays, go to the VFW. Yeah. It's nice because it's community. I'm very thankful for this community that we have here. All right, let's get back into chanting. Got to get over my PTSD, my worker man, some scar of PTSD stuff.
Can't you be a builder by Zoom?
I only work 2 hours a day. I don't understand why the hell I get so stressed out. Actually, it's not bad, but what I thrived on in my 20s, like what was my apparatus, modus apparati, now is the exact opposite. Right? Chaos, get it done, and all kinds of stuff, and then taking, when I'm not doing that, take all the time to be as much of a hippie as I possibly could be. Like a very yin and yang style of life, but in my older years, I'm more in the middle ground, common ground. Pendulum doesn't swing too far anymore. So the second I get a little off balance, or whatever, the mind starts to pull, and all the people around me on the job are, oh man, we got someone, they start doing that thing. It's like, Om Namah Shivaya. See you guys later. Gotta go for a walk. Go be the guy. You guys remember how it goes? Radha Ramani. Okay.
Jai
Rama Bolo or Hare Rama Hare Krishna? Huh? Hare Rama, Rama Bolo. Alright, hands for Rama
We're
Bolo.
doing Rama Bowl everywhere.
No,
It's a lot of hands.
Tim doesn't want to do it.
Huh?
Maybe both.
Rama Bolo, right?
Yes.
You want to start off? John, you want me to start off?
Well, because you asked me, would you like me to start?
Thank
So we'll take a deep breath in. Long breath out. Deep breath in. Long breath. Deep breath in and raise your arms and stretch. Exhale. Deep breath in and stretch and exhale. Deep breath in and hold it. And Om Shivaya. All right, try to keep your focus on nature. There's a lot of things moving at fast rates out there, a lot of cars, a lot of stuff. A lot of people. It's all good. But we need to commune. Make sure you take time to commune with nature. Your breath. Try not to talk about anything or anyone in a negative way. Only positive. Try to look for the good in everything. And remember, we get to do all this stuff. We don't have to. We get to. Nobody tells you they love you today. I love you very much.
We love you very much.
Sadhgunath Maharaj ki jai. Sita on the drums. Carol on the bell. Lauren, aka Sugar Girl.
And all of you.
Kirtan Wala. Our beautiful Kirtan Wala. Wow. Who's got it better than us, huh? Man. There was a moment in there, I don't know what we were chanting, but man, I was out there. It started like right after the first Om on the first Om Namah Shivaya. I was like, man, we're out of time.
I have a question. We used to do an hour and a half, and now we only do 9 minutes.
I don't know what happens, man. And I tried to get her, we start early, we started early. It was like 5 or 10 minutes early too. I'm like, the second we plug everything in, I just start to go.
So does that mean you're not here next week?
No,
You're going away?
no, I'll be here. And if I'm not gonna be here, we will know, but I'm gonna be here. We're all gonna be here. You won't? You're gonna be back, right? It's funny how, like everything revolves around kirtan.
Yeah.
Like my whole life is like, if I go away, I go Tuesday to Sunday. Or Monday morning, I come back.
I just had a meeting with my boss today to get off Monday, so I don't have to work anymore on Monday. Yay! So excited, I asked for what I wanted, I got it. No more rushing to church. I'll be streaming.
Well, and I tell you, this new traffic pattern seems to be working pretty good.
It does actually.
Oh, does it work? Oh, that's
It works, yeah. So it's running pretty smooth
So far.
great.
so far, yeah.
Well, I'm just thrilled to have to be coming close to work.
That's so good. The holidays.
Couldn't be happier. Be my sleeping.
Monday. A long time ago, we were doing kirtan on Wednesday. It was like 1995. And this guy came and he goes, why do you guys do kirtan on Monday night? It's like the dumbest night to do kirtan. And I'm like, you come here every week, how can it be done? Right? Because he comes every week. And he's like, I I guess Monday's good.
Secret
Pile and
It was so funny though, when he said, he was like,
programming. Programming.
I'm like, that's good for the rest of the week.
It's such a.
Monday meditation. Tuesday meditation.
Throw a dart in the mouth.
Yeah, I was looking at it after that came up, like all the seniors are still doing it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I wash it every time I hang it, I don't leave it out.
We had plans, we had friends to go to fly in and then they were gonna go like.
Yeah, well, when it works out, I'll know.
10 years from now.
Anyway, they were gonna go to London for a couple of days, and then they had planned to go to the Netherlands and Amsterdam or something like that. And then he found out they could take a rental car to
Yeah,
London.
it's too heavy with them. I'm trying to show off.
Like right before he said, he's like, oh, well, he's like, we're just gonna get on the plane and go to London and we're just gonna decide, you know, we're gonna pick Scotland or Wales, they have so.
Myers, I'm taking your thing.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
I'm sorry.
So, I just love that adventurous,
Anybody want some
spontaneous
oil?
spirit.
Right?
I do. Yeah,
I want
for that.
I want something.
Yeah.
Whatever you have, I want it.
We all want
I'll take anything different. You have to
Which
go?
one is this?
Sue,
She's
yeah,
on,
we don't pack up, but.
she wanted to go to.
Slightly to the right.
This is big.
That's nice.
Reminder, right?
That's a good one.
There's
Vincent,
I know there's a lot of sandalwood.
the bag for your mom.
How much you're gonna.
That's the bag that Miles came in.
Tim has it.
Real?
For now, till the 20th.
Wow.
She might come back and
It's a
say.
good reminder, you forget, it's like.
Well, before.
Yeah.
So she comes back
Sunday.
for the summer, you mean?
Did you come on Sunday? I'm gonna be in Mexico.
Kolegados na convenía para también con México.
Did you update the phone?
I found like an app or whatever,
Thank you so much.
and so.
Yeah, thank God. I didn't tell you
So you're
that.
gonna bring us to
No.
You, man. It takes all of us.
It's all of us.
We're also good.
Everyone starts with their name here, which is weird.
It's such an easy name.
It's
Did I get it right on phone?
If you did, but you did yourself.
No, Marcel.
I didn't know what happened.
Roll.
What's up? It's just broke.
These go away.
They go June 7th. How about June 7th?
I can usually push it.
Well, maybe we could do like June and then July.
Yes. Be after. Or after 7.
Crazy.
Crazy good.
That was crazy.
2 to 7:30. We're thinking of maybe a date for
Saturday.
Saturday is June.
Yeah.
Have to be after 7. So 7:30. Yes. June 7th on Saturday. Yeah, we're good. But I could maybe get up like a half an hour early or something.
Then you're gonna get all the way.
Yeah.
But from most of you.
Yeah, it'll take at least an hour.
I went tonight or tomorrow morning.
Yeah. I don't know exactly.
Well, you would want to, if we're
You
gonna
never
do it
know.
on a Saturday, go with the wallet.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, it would be the best.
I can ask
Well,
for.
another day is also fine. It doesn't have to.
Where's our friend Kyle?
Saturdays are.
He's in Los Angeles.
Sunday?
I forgot to turn the YouTube off.
Maybe we could do Saturday and then just.
See you, Kyle.
Is he on there?
Well, we're gonna start over there on June 1st. So we should probably do the move